We feel
the Taliban is a terrorist group?
I don't think that the Taliban is an armed insurgency.
Before we start throwing around labels, let's look more broadly at terrorism.
Today, we are witnessing nothing more than a form of criminal anarchy.
Nothing more than criminal anarchy. White House officials still avoiding calling Islamic terrorists, something the former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency is warning has very serious consequences. Retired General Michael Flynn saying, quote, "You cannot defeat an enemy you do not admit exists." So is being too PC putting our lives and our investments at risk? Hi, everybody. I'm David Asman. Welcome to Forbes on Fox. Let's go in focus with Steve Forbes, Rich Karlgaard, Elizabeth McDonald, Sabrina Schaefer, John Tamny, and Rick Unger. Steve, nothing more than criminal anarchy, really?
David, that's like saying Adolf Hitler was an overgrown juvenile delinquent subject to temper tantrums. This unwillingness to recognize what is out there is putting lives in jeopardy and our economic well-being in jeopardy. We see forces of barbarism, Islamic barbarism, on the march. Yemen's now falling, moving in Nigeria. Putin's now doing more aggression in Ukraine. That hurts investment because of the uncertainty that surrounds the world today. And so this is ominous, economically and for lives.
Rick, there's no uncertainty among the American people, 56% of whom believe that we are at war with radical Islam.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised that the number's that low. I would have thought that far more than 56% would realize that. Look, you know, I've been calling this guy the White House intern. What he had to say yesterday was preposterous. Anybody who chooses...
He was the deputy press secretary,
I know,
by the way.
He is. Just, I don't.
But it's look at who else. John Kerry is the Secretary of State. He says nothing more than criminal activity.
Look, and I know you know this. I do not understand why this White House is so reluctant to call it what it is. I will say this: I don't think that it has an impact. I don't agree with that on how we fight this war, because you still have to point out that President Obama has killed more terrorists than anybody before him, and I think they do understand they're fighting a war. Right. I'm not supporting their refusing to say it, though.
All right. By the way, Chris Kyle himself alone killed 200 terrorists, so I'm not sure about whether Obama's killed more than previous presidents. But it is not just Republicans who are saying this, by the way. Congressman Tulsi Gabbard, she is an Iraqi war veteran, by the way, a new congresswoman. Listen to what she said about this.
Unless you clearly identify your enemy, then you cannot come up with a very effective strategy to defeat that enemy.
That's why it's important.
Yeah, and she's a Democrat. You know, you risk more loss of lives if you don't state the obvious. This is a war of theology. It's a war of theological ideas. It's a war of ideas rooted in a brutal theology that's in the Quran. When that British soldier, Lee Rigby, was killed, was beheaded, his murderers cited the Quran. So this is basically, it's better to have a dialogue to get to peace than sending more drones or going to war. The Muslim world needs to stand up and issue a serious fatwa and seriously acknowledge what is in the Quran that is supporting these murders.
Yeah, and John, what does it get you, tiptoeing around the term Islamic terror? We just, by the way, the non-terrorist Taliban, according to the White House, they just murdered 3 American contractors a couple of days ago. So they do not respect, they are emboldened by weakness on our part, are they not?
I hear you, and let's face it, it's understood that national defense is the president's prerogative, but I think we somewhat overrate this. If President Obama's lack of rhetoric or if lack from the administration really were making us less safe, it would show up in heavily falling market indices. It would show up in a falling U.S. dollar. We all believe in market signals, and I think those market signals are saying that the lack of rhetoric really doesn't mean as much as is presumed.
But, Sabrina, we are spending a fortune in human lives and in treasure, about $60 billion in Afghanistan. And sometimes you have to consider the faith of your enemy. Look at the Japanese in World War II. They believed their emperor was God. That affected our war strategy, our planning. There is a relationship.
Absolutely. Look, rhetoric isn't everything, but I do agree that we have to recognize what it is that we're fighting. That's why this year IWF honored Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and she made the very important point. Yeah, and she said, look, the radical Islamic terrorists value death more than they value life. And that is something that is very hard for Americans to really understand. And certainly it's something the president doesn't understand, I don't think. But really sort of comprehending that is part of what it's going to take to win the war on terror. We have to realize that this is not a small aberration. this has become, as Steve suggested, a major offshoot of Islam throughout the Middle East and North Africa.
And, Rich, sometimes even the Army doesn't get it. I mean, look at Major Hassan, the guy behind the Fort Hood massacres. He hid behind political correctness. There were clear signs that he was a radical Islamist, and yet because of PC standards, he wasn't found out sooner.
Well, it is political correctness run amok. There's a theory behind it that I think will answer Rick Unger's question as to why, and that's because President Obama looks at the 2 billion Muslims around the world who are overwhelmingly poor. They are overwhelmingly people of color. And the politically correct view is you do not criticize these oppressed groups. And so these discussions never occur. You saw this tragically playing out in England, where over 15 years, 1,100 girls were raped, gang raped by Muslim immigrants from Somalia.
Unbelievable. And you bring up a great point, which is why more nonviolent Muslims don't speak out against this. Although, Steve, I must say there are some, and we've featured them on Fox News. There's a guy named Zuhdi Jasser, for one, who has spoken out against radical Islamists. Let's listen to what he had to say.
If you don't call it Islam, you let the Islamist movements and their theocracies all over the planet dominate who we are.
So thank God for him, but why aren't there more of him?
Well, I think part of it is they don't see firm leadership, and more have to do that. The president of Egypt, I think, has taken the lead a couple of months ago, saying Islam has got to reform itself. But those forces of moderation would be helped if they saw firm leadership from the United States. For example, Ukraine, I know that's not Islamic fight, but the fact that we won't arm the Ukrainians to defeat the Russian aggressors is a sign. The fact that we won't go beyond drones and a few airstrikes in the Middle East, Nigeria and Yemen, tells people we're not serious about this fight. And Rick, so if you want forces of civilization to move forward, you need firm leadership, and we have to, in the U.S., have to provide that.
And Rick, as Steve just mentioned, the president of Egypt, we have to remember this president, our president, has not been terribly supportive of him. In fact, he was more supportive of the Islamic Brotherhood that preceded him. They are more terrorists, certainly, than this guy.
Well, I think in terms of that relationship, it may be a little too soon to say. However, I do want to say something about the great question you asked, David, about Muslims speaking out. I've been digging into this. There are more of them than you might think. The media may not be giving them the opportunity, but let me point out what happened in Chicago. A woman who stood before the cameras, a Muslim mother, saying, you know, ISIL, leave our children alone.
I remember that.
She was ridiculed on by certain television commentators who questioned her motives. Don't do that. If you want them to speak, support them when they do.
I praise everyone who speaks out against Islamic terrorism, whether they're Muslims themselves or Christians or forever.
Yeah, that's right, David. We support, the civilized world would support that. What this is about is getting the Muslim world who don't support that to stop. And the way you get them to stop is you have to challenge them. You know, George Orwell, the author, said, words corrupt thoughts. Religious beliefs are choices. These individuals are choosing to think this way. It's not just jihadi thought in the Quran. It's also blasphemy laws that kill a lot of Christians overseas.
And John Tamny, you understand, like few people do, that ideas matter. Words matter. They do make a difference. And as I mentioned before, in World War II and other times, a person's religious faith does come into play when you're deciding war strategy.
Yes, words and ideas matter, and I would love to see more outrage from Muslims, and I think it's offensive that there's not more of it. But I'm also aware of the fact that politicians are so prone to mistakes that cost us an enormity in terms of lives. And so if there's going to be maybe more carefulness on the part of Washington or the administration, I sometimes like that because of their ability to err in ways that cause a lot of blood to spill.
All right, got to be the last word on it. Thank you very much, gang. Very important discussion. Last week, we exposed the cost of the